This is Derek Regensberger, and welcome to another episode of the Clarinet Connection, your source for gear and product reviews and practice and performance tips for the clarinet. Today we're going to talk more about practice. A couple of weeks ago I did a video describing generally the theory behind what's called deliberate practice. One of the things that I mentioned in that video was feedback. We could simply rely on our private teacher to provide feedback, but we only get that at most once a week. So really what we want to do is use ourselves to provide more immediate feedback. There's a common saying that we're often our own worst critic, and in this case that's pretty much true. What we really want to do is use our own interpretations of our playing to guide our future practice and performance. So let's see how we can do that. First, one of the things that you really want to do is focus on how you play and how you practice. If your response to the question is, how did that go? Is, well, it sounded okay, I don't know, I made a couple mistakes, that's not very useful feedback. I'm going to demonstrate how to not do practice here in just a moment. And for assistance, I'm going to use my 20-year-old self. So as you can imagine, in the late 80s, early 90s, as a college student, one of the things that I kept running into was sort of a brick wall. I could get good at something, but not really any better. So what was I doing wrong? Why didn't I improve enough so that I could perfect something? Well, I'll show you a couple of mistakes that I made and how to correct them and not make them yourself. Hi, I'm Derek's 20-year-old self. Dig to do, huh? Well, let's play this Mozart and see how I do. That was pretty good, I guess. I got a little fast in one spot, I think. Yeah. So overall, it was pretty good. Guess I gotta fix a couple notes. Let's try this Rose etude. Well, obviously I got to fix some notes in there, but I'll do that tomorrow. What you want to do is consciously be more aware of how you're playing and what you're doing as you practice. This will help you critique yourself and provide more immediate and more effective feedback. So a few things that you want to pay attention to as you play and practice. Your dynamics. How well are you following the dynamic markings of the piece? Your tempo. Is your tempo in the correct speed? Is it, more importantly, is it uniform? So even when you're practicing something at, say, quarter or half speed, you want to make sure that you're using nice even tempo across the piece so that you're staying in time. A great way to do this, of course, is to use a metronome while you play. Another thing that you want to look for is your interpretation. Don't just woodenly or mechanically play through something during practice. Those habits that you develop are going to turn into things that you don't want to have during a performance. So it's really important to use your best musical interpretation skills as you're practicing. Obviously, you want to pay attention to how well you're playing the notes. Pay attention to those small mistakes as you make them and figure out what you're doing wrong so that you can correct them the next time around. What we want to do is develop some sort of practice plan. And I talked a little bit about that in my first video on practice. So let's go through some specifics. First of all, you want to set some goals for the practice. And when you set goals, you want to make sure that they are meaningful goals. You don't want to just set something like, I want to be able to play this faster or play it well. You really want to set specific goals so that you can monitor how well you're achieving them as you practice. I think a critical component of that is you set a goal, you then perform, and then you evaluate or critique how well you performed. and then it just kind of repeats in a circle. So again, it's that idea of a feedback loop. You use the feedback from your first go around to inform what changes you're going to make and what goals you're going to set in order to make yourself better the second time and third time around. I like to think of it as goal, do, critique. Okay, so three things in a little bit of a circle. So again, it creates that feedback loop that just keeps going and going to help you get better at something. So one of the things that I do is create a practice plan. So just like a hockey coach or a basketball coach would set some sort of practice plan for each day. In other words, what skills specifically does the coach want to focus on? How does he want to get the players better? Well, the same thing applies in clarinet practice. So what I do is I sit down for the week and figure out what specific tasks, what specific musical excerpts, what specific skills that I want to work on, and that's how I develop my practice plan. So my goals will be things like increase the speed of an orchestral excerpt from 80 beats per minute to 120 beats per minute. And as you can see, those are specific and measurable goals. One of the key things to using a practice plan is, again, coming up with a goal that you can easily monitor whether you're achieving it or not. So that's pretty simple when it comes to things like tempi. It's easy to measure with a metronome whether you've achieved your goal or not. Obviously, musical interpretation, those kinds of things are a little bit harder to measure. So we really have to look at what are some of the elements of interpretation, really focusing in on the skill that makes up the interpretation. All right, one of the keys to effective practice is break things down into smaller, more manageable chunks. And I'll show you here in a minute how I've done that on a particular orchestral excerpt. You really want to avoid just simply playing long passages a couple of times and hoping you're going to get better at them. When you play something that's 60 measures long, for example, it's really going to be hard to improve those 60 measures in any meaningful way unless you break it down into more manageable chunks. What's my overall time frame? So let's say it's 3 months. And in that 3 months, I want to improve my tempo from, let's say, 50 beats a minute to 168 beats per minute. So that's a difference of roughly 120. So that 120, how am I going to improve that over those 12 weeks? So what I would do is, let's say that I've got a 60 measure or 66 measure, in this case, Ravel excerpt. How am I going to try and structure that? So let's take a look. Okay, here is the Ravel Daphne and Chloe excerpt. This is from 211 to the end. This is a common excerpt that is part of many orchestral auditions. And what I've done is broken this 66 measure excerpt down into 8 different sections. So here you can see I've marked in various sections and where the ends of each section are. And what I've tried to do is break these down into somewhere around 8 measure sections. The first one is 9 measures, although a couple of them are simply rests. The purpose of breaking down these excerpts into smaller sections is to make it easier to learn the notes and the rhythms in each little chunk. And that plan involves breaking each of these sections into sort of 2-week segments. And so for the first segment, I will set a goal of reaching the required tempo of 168 beats per minute. And again, working on just those 7 measures so that I can get that up to speed. And then I'll do the next thing for section 2, etc. Obviously, I want to keep playing the rest of the piece, but I'm going to do so at a much slower tempo. So even though, like, say, weeks 1 and 2 are just going to be spent on this first segment, I'm going to play through the whole 66 measures just at a much slower tempo. And hopefully by the time I get to, say, week 10 and I'm on segment 7 or 8, those particular segments are going to be learned much quicker because I've at least got the the fingerings down at a very slow tempo. In particular, I might take section 1 here and set, let's say, 50 beats per minute. Let's say that that's the tempo that I can play to start off with. Yours might be 100, whatever. And on day 1, I'm going to set my goal at, let's say, 60. So after days 1's practice, I want to be able to play at 60 beats per minute, and then day 2 at 70, etc., etc. The end goal, of course, is by the end of the 2 weeks to be up to my roughly 170 beats per minute. So that's how I'm going to break down a piece of music to make it much more manageable. As you develop your plan, you really want to look at what are the etudes and exercises, scales, arpeggios that are going to help me improve the particular piece of music that I'm trying to get better at. So for example, if I'm looking at something that has a lot of chromatic, then I'm going to want to incorporate some chromatic exercises into my warm-ups and routine. This is going to help me improve my speed and my note recognition in order so that I can play the excerpt much better. So for example, I might look at incorporating bumblebee loops from Flight of the Bumblebee, because it's all based on the chromatic scale.